Hi, everyone. Welcome to an extra special edition of our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith, a show for all things Jewish history and culture, Israel, and issues important to the Jewish community. I'm B'nai B'rith CEO, Dan Mariaschin. In this episode, you'll hear my discussions with B'nai B'rith policy experts on everything from our U.S. domestic priorities to our work at the United Nations and across the globe, to our tireless advocacy on behalf of seniors. But first, if you enjoy this program, subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. 180 years of B'nai B'rith means 180 years of advocating for global Jewry, of combating anti-Semitism, of championing human rights, and of helping others, from providing disaster relief and assisting communities in crisis to supporting the most vulnerable among us. In 1843, 12 German Jewish immigrants gathered in Sinsheimer's Cafe on New York's Lower East Side to confront, as Isaac Rosenberg, one of B'nai B'rith's founders, called, the deplorable condition of Jews in this, our newly adopted country. It was from their determination to provide humanitarian aid and support to those in need that B'nai B'rith, as a worldwide organization, came to be. And our mission to make the world a safer and more tolerant place has persisted. Today, B'nai B'rith's dedicated policy experts are frequently in the rooms where things happen, in Europe and Latin America, in Israel, at the United Nations and other major bodies, and in the U.S., from the community to the halls of Congress, all in service of the same mission our 12 founders set out to achieve 180 years ago. Now, you'll hear from our experts in short conversations centered on their key areas of focus, beginning with Deputy Director of our International Center for Human Rights and Public Policy and our Director of Legislative Affairs, Rabbi Eric Fusfield. We hope you enjoy. Joining us now is my colleague, Rabbi Eric Fusfield, Deputy Director of our International Center for Human Rights and Public Policy. Eric also serves as our Director of Legislative Affairs. Eric, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, I think everyone knows we're experiencing a tremendous spike in anti-Semitism globally. I want to ask you about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is a consortium of countries that work together to promote Holocaust education and remembrance projects. IRA, as the organization is known, has a working definition of anti-Semitism, something that we really never had before, and you worked on that definition over a period of years. What's the status of the IRA working definition, and especially in light of the White House National Strategy to Combat Anti-Semitism and other developments?
Yeah, to date, more than 30 countries have adopted the IRA working definition as a vital tool for education and guidance. And the number continues to grow. More than 30 U.S. states have also endorsed it, most recently Virginia, following legislation that passed just this spring with B'nai B'rith's involvement. And we pressed the administration to codify the 2019 White House executive order on anti-Semitism, which includes the IRA definition, to further protect students from anti-Semitism. And the administration has pledged to issue a formal regulation by this December, and we continue to monitor that development. The White House strategy that you just referenced featured many important measures to raise awareness of anti-Semitism and increase Jewish security. But while it endorsed the IRA working definition, it also unfortunately indicated that it, quote, welcomes and appreciates the nexus definition of anti-Semitism. The nexus document is an academic proposal that greatly undermines the IRA definition by opting not to condemn anti-Zionism. The nexus definition not only grants a permission slip to anti-Israel hatred, it does so with shocking specificity because it gives cover, for example, to those who challenge Israel's right to exist and those who wish to revive the canard that Zionism is racism. So it actually harms Jewish security.
Well, as the number of Holocaust survivors continues to drop off due to the biological clock, Holocaust education and remembrance become even more important than ever before. Are there any new policy initiatives with respect to Holocaust education in the United States that you might want to keep an eye on?
Yeah, multiple states in recent years have enacted laws mandating Holocaust education across their public schools by varying degrees. But there's no federal requirement on Holocaust education, let alone that of other genocides. Yet, enacting legislation on Holocaust education marks only the first step to genocide awareness. For the handful of US states that have passed bills specifically requiring Holocaust education, some struggle with funding and the absence of oversight committees that would help reduce disparities in the material and methods surrounding Holocaust teachings. B'nai B'rith has actively supported a bipartisan bill called the Holocaust Education and Anti-Semitism Lessons, or HEAL Act, which will direct the U.S. Holocaust Museum to conduct a study on Holocaust education in public schools nationwide. This study will assess which states and school districts require Holocaust education, identify the standards and approaches they employ, and report the results to Congress.
There's another concerning issue. It seems that it came almost out of nowhere. U.S. aid to Israel has become a growing topic of discussion in the Jewish community. What does this mean for the U.S.-Israel relationship, and why is it important for that relationship to remain very close and very strong?
Indeed, a little bit out of nowhere, it's even inserting itself into the presidential campaign, so we need to stay on top of this issue. B'nai B'rith, along with our coalition partners, has always favored not just aid to Israel, but a robust international affairs budget generally as an investment in U.S. interests abroad. We've always heard arguments from Israel's opponents that aid to Israel should be reduced or eliminated so as to better impose policies the U.S. might like and Israelis don't, because a poor Israel will presumably be less able to assert itself. But what's new are some voices within the Jewish community, as you said, saying they want to cut the aid because it buys the United States too much influence and because the benefits of the relationship now serve primarily the United States. And these voices are arguing for a more strictly transactional relationship that would give Israel greater diplomatic and strategic flexibility and lessen America's ability to pressure the Israelis into policies they don't want. But the problem with this argument, however fashionable it might be becoming, is that the aid program guarantees sustained close cooperation between the Israeli and American defense industries and makes American manufacturers more attuned to the Israeli market, thus fostering a greater military alliance and extensive intelligence sharing at a time when the threats from terrorist groups and Iran's nuclear program are growing. We don't need a bilateral relationship that's purely transactional. We need one that is rooted both in democratic values that we share and pragmatic security considerations. And we need to continue to make the case for that.
Eric, again, thanks for all that you do in the area of public policy. We appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you.
Joining us now from Brussels is my colleague, Alina Bricman, B'nai B'rith's Director of European Union Affairs. Alina, welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, B'nai B'rith, of course, has a historical presence in Europe dating all the way back to the 1880s. But in terms of a European Union Affairs office, B'nai B'rith has had a Brussels office focused on EU institutions since 1997. How do you see the role of B'nai B'rith in that context, and how has it been shifting over the years?
Well, B'nai B'rith has always been an organization that was sort of ahead of its time, that led with a lot of foresight and great intuition about where the world was heading. And I think founding an office for EU affairs back in '97 is really one such instance. Remember, the European Union in its current form was only created in 1992. That was a decade of very fast integration where EU countries started to cooperate much more on anything from internal affairs, justice, security, and of course to participate in the single market where the free flow of goods and the free circulation of people started. New countries joined the EU, and in 1997, that very year when B'nai B'rith opened its EU Affairs office, as one of really the first US headquartered Jewish organizations to do so, that is the very year EU countries signed what is called the Amsterdam Treaty, with the purpose of creating a much stronger voice for the EU in the world. And this is not a coincidence, of course, but precisely, I would say, the fulfillment of that foresight, an understanding that the EU will only further integrate. And with that integration will come both opportunities, but also a lot of new challenges. An understanding that transatlantic relations are increasingly essential, and that in this context, a strong voice for the Jewish community is crucial. And so I would say from the very first day to today, B'nai B'rith has been serving in Brussels with the same mission: safeguard the rights and freedoms of the Jewish community, promote transatlantic cooperation, and just be an outspoken and principled advocate is what is a very turbulent word, unfortunately.
Well, very much on our mind has been the global spike in anti-Semitism. We see it everywhere globally, Europe, of course, included. Speaking of our continued role in Europe, you've been working recently on the topic of marches and demonstrations glorifying Nazism and fascism that continue to occur in Europe on an annual basis. Tell us about the report that you've worked on and the impact that that report has had.
Absolutely. The topic is grim, but we were thrilled to publish this essential report in the past March, together with a premier German think tank, the Amadeo Antonio Foundation, and as well with input from experts across Europe. For us, really, this all started from a belief that it is absolutely unthinkable that in Europe, in 2023, annual marches glorifying Nazism and fascism can occur uninterrupted on the same streets where the Holocaust happened. Of course, for many years, Jewish groups, ourselves included, and other civil society actors have been working to curtail these marches, but this usually has happened in silos. On the local level, thinking about what administrative measures can be implemented in local or regional courts. What we wanted to do is really to change the approach, to put the spotlight on the fact that we are dealing with a pan-European problem and with pan-European trends. That extremists collaborate across borders, they train each other, they fund each other, and they build a common white supremacist ideology. And so we felt that solutions also have to be pan-European. What is a European strategy to address anti-Semitism, for instance, if we do not manage to address the most basic, evident, and dramatic expression of that hatred? We've presented a whole host of recommendations for action. We had the chance to present the report in a variety of international fora, and we are planning further actions, including hopefully training for journalists, civil society, and law enforcement to effectively deal with this phenomenon. And we sense that people are listening. If you haven't seen the report, I highly encourage you to find it on our website. That's the thought I want to leave viewers with on this question.
Well, this important report actually was preceded by some important work that you've done on hate online, anti-Semitism online. So absolutely go to the website and find this important report and everything else that you've been doing on anti-Semitism in Europe. I'm going to ask you now to be a prognosticator. The European elections are coming up next year, 2024. What are you watching for?
Yeah, important question. It's a difficult time in Europe. The war in Ukraine, biggest conflict on European soil since World War II, is ongoing. A migration crisis that is an absolute humanitarian disaster for which no sustainable plans seem to exist. And as well, the lingering strains caused by COVID make this a really sensitive time for Europe. And as we very well know, those are exactly the times when polarization booms, when hateful rhetoric becomes a useful tool, and where scapegoats are very much needed. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in many places in Europe, and that's often the canary in the coal mine, as we know. So, as we anticipate the European elections, we must watch out for this very authorizing discourse, for increased populism, for conspiratorial narratives that much too often have Jews at their center. I want to see centrist and mainstream parties, and especially the center left, engage more constructively with Israel. Although, if past this prologue, I'm not holding my breath, but there's a lot of work to be done on that front. And I'm also watching out for parties' positions on religious freedom matters. Encroachments on Shehita in particular have been more and more common. That's, of course, very, very worrying. Ultimately, I would say I really hope for high participation. Jewish citizens of Europe have a higher attachment than average to the European Union, and I hope that this feeling will materialize in them making their voices heard at the ballot box in what is an essential event for the European Union next year.
Well, our Brussels office is a very important post for B'nai B'rith. And Alina, we appreciate all of the work that you are doing, you have done, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Here's my colleague, Eduardo Kohn, B'nai B'rith Director for Latin American Affairs, who joins us from Montevideo, Uruguay. Eduardo, great to have you here.
Great to be there, here with all of you.
Well, first question for you. What are the two main challenges for B'nai B'rith in Latin America? We've been in Latin America for almost 100 years. The challenges change. Tell us about what the two most important are in your mind today.
Two words: continuity, one challenge, and anti-Semitism, second challenge, as main challenges. The institutional integration is shrinking in small communities, as in all over the world, and it is difficult to keep the structures which are the basis of continuity. Jewish schools and youth movements are the basis to face the situation. The largest communities in Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, keep their strength bringing education, social and cultural activities. B'nai B'rith, as usual, is a very strong tool for keeping the Jewish people together through different programs, most of them community action and political involvement. B'nai B'rith in Panama, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, as an example, develops large community services inside and outside the Jewish community and through young generations. Combating the ongoing raising of anti-Semitism, mainly in social media, is a daily work for B'nai B'rith, and where anti-Semitism is growing day after day, like in Chile, the work is done together with the umbrella organization to be stronger and more effective, facing threats and negative facts. Negative UN record voting against Israel from most of the Latin American governments is also a daily fight, because those votes, at the end of the day, are anti-Semitic incitement in social media, universities, and media in general. So, continuity, anti-Semitism, this is the briefing in two words.
One of the main ways of fostering support for Israel around the world is to encourage important opinion makers to see Israel for itself. What are the main programs created by B'nai B'rith in Latin America, together with the B'nai B'rith World Center in Jerusalem, to bring political leaders, journalists, scientists to Israel to show them the realities on the ground for Israelis every day?
Well, awards to scientists, as it happens with Light and Truth Award, which is awarded in Uruguay in the last 2 decades, make it possible that young scientists from Uruguay, in this case, travel to Israel, know Israel, and most important, exchange meetings and learning with Israel experts in their specific field. And they establish a connection which will be useful and very practical in the future. This year, B'nai B'rith has made some important link because it made possible that a step forward in an agreement between the Weizmann Institute and the Pasteur Institute located in Uruguay. What will happen? Uruguayan scientists are traveling now to the Weizmann to learn for no less than 6 months. And experts from the Weizmann Institute will travel to Uruguay to training Uruguayan scientists in different areas of expertise. This is one of the programs in science. There are also programs in culture. But besides, it is a great program to bring Latin American journalists to Israel to learn in 1 week the reality of the country in high-tech, science, politics, history. It has already been done here 3 times with very great success. And the last one was a short time ago in July. We brought 14 journalists from 10 countries to Israel. And the B'nai B'rith World Center has been central, very central in all the question of scientists and journalists designing vast and great agendas. Indeed.
One of the things that you've pioneered over the years, first in Uruguay and then in other places in Latin America, has been Holocaust remembrance programs. Tell us about the programs and events in Latin America to remember and to teach about the Holocaust, and how B'nai B'rith continues to advocate for stronger Holocaust education.
We are based in 3 great issues. B'nai B'rith organizes the Night of Broken Glasses commemoration in the last 4 decades all over Latin America to show the whole society, not only inside the community, the beginning of the most brutal violence against Jews that few time after ended in what we know the mass killing and the Shoah. Most of the events have had high-profile keynote speakers, and the attendance of government and political dignitaries are a great mark of B'nai B'rith all over Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, Panama, Costa Rica, etc. But there are at that night also great events together with Catholic and Protestant churches. So it is a larger scope in political remembrance, but also together working with the religion, with the Christian communities. The second is January 27. Is mostly commemorated in Latin American congresses, but B'nai B'rith participates in all of them, in each one of the countries. Like in Chile, for example, B'nai B'rith has a direct participation in its organization, and January 27 is a very important step to educate the question of Shoah. The third one is the teaching of Shoah, which is being introduced in the public curricula of high school in several countries. Argentina is leading, but there is in Brazil, in in Uruguay, in Chile, and other countries. It is also being taught in private colleges, and exhibits that are sent by Yad Vashem lately and other organizations are exhibited in public museums. So schools and high schools attend, and young Jewish guides make the audience learn about the Holocaust. So we have these kind of programs. We try to cover all the issues, the political questions in Night of Broken Glasses, what is the international commemoration in January, teaching Holocaust every day, if possible, in public and private schools.
Eduardo, thanks for sharing this important information about B'nai B'rith in Latin America with us. We appreciate your being with us today.
Thank you very much, Dan. A pleasure.
Joining us now is David Michaels, our Director of United Nations and Intercommunal Affairs. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Let's talk about the United Nations. B'nai B'rith, present at the founding of the UN back in 1945, receiving our first NGO, non-governmental organization credentials in the late 1940s, and then opening a full-time office on UN affairs in New York, right near the UN, going back to 1960. Let's bring it current, because the issue of Israel at the United Nations is one that we're deeply concerned about. The UN's latest Commission of Inquiry on Israel has predictably issued yet more biased reports on the Jewish state. What has the Commission been saying, and what have they been doing recently, and what is expected in terms of where it goes moving forward? Tell our viewers a bit about what B'nai B'rith has done in response.
Sure. Well, this commission is, as you've suggested, more of the same, but also unprecedented in a number of respects. More of the same in the sense that Israel, as we know, has been the subject of more attention and scrutiny and condemnation within UN settings than any other member state of the UN. In fact, often more than all other 192 member states combined. And this is the latest mechanism set up specifically to scrutinize, to malign, and to target Israel. That said, this Commission of Inquiry, as I think we've discussed in the past, really is unparalleled in its scope, in its duration. It's open-ended in the resources, taxpayer resources from around the world that have been assigned to it, and frankly, in the open bias, the open prejudice characterizing each member of the three-person commission. This commission is expected, as it has already over the past 2 years, to deliver at least 2 reports a year, one mid-year in Geneva to the Human Rights Council, and one toward the end of the year to the General Assembly here in New York. And each of the reports, again, so far has been quite predictable and quite blatant in the disregard for any pretense to fairness or to balance in how it treats this very complex and important issue. The last report issued a few months ago deals with civil society, and specifically this allegation that Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, represses Palestinian civil society. And the same report goes out of its way itself to try to repress any criticism of the Palestinian side and of the COI itself. The report, like each of its predecessors, speaks only of Palestinian women and children as victims, never of Israeli women and children as victims, speaks of offenses to Palestinian identity, never Israeli identity, and calls on member states of the UN to intervene only on behalf of Palestinian rights, never Israeli rights.
David, at the end of 2022, the UN General Assembly referred what it framed as the legality of Israeli policies in the territories to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, an escalation of international action singling out Israel for scrutiny and condemnation. Where does that process stand right now? And please talk about how B'nai B'rith has engaged on this issue.
Yeah, well, you know, they say the definition of chutzpah, of gumption, is if a son murders his parents and then approaches the judge and asks for leniency because he's an orphan. This is exactly what the Palestinians have been pushing for at the ICJ for years and decades, for 75 years now. They've been perpetuating the conflict by rejecting every single serious peace initiative and sweeping peace proposal and engaging in terrorism, delegitimization of Israel and demonization of Israel, only to then seek international intervention to change the status quo. I have to say, they've been remarkably, Dan, you know this well, they've been remarkably transparent, including in an op-ed a number of years ago in the New York Times by none other than Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, about their strategy of what they call internationalizing the conflict with Israel. And so beyond real issues, and I know we don't have time here for all of the details, but real issues of jurisdiction, discriminatory focus and mandate, the fact that a majority even of the UN membership hadn't backed this referral by the General Assembly to the ICJ, and the fact that the Palestinians don't currently constitute a state in the way that parties to ICJ cases normally are. This case clearly both ignores the fact that the long history of the Jewish people in the land in question, the fact that Israel does not possess a territory that had belonged to a sovereign country beforehand. But most importantly, most practically, this initiative, this case, and it's being taken up by the ICJ, only further disincentivizes actual resolution of the conflict through direct Palestinian negotiation and compromise with Israel. So for B'nai B'rith, in addition to all of our focus over the past year and 2 years now on the COI in Geneva, including in interventions at the Human Rights Council, B'nai B'rith, with the leadership, in this case, of our honorary president, Richard Heidemann, and the senior honorary counsel of B'nai B'rith Canada, David Matus, has made a direct submission to the ICJ in The Hague, laying out in great detail all of the reasons why this case is both inappropriate and counterproductive. Richard Heidemann led a similar initiative on behalf of B'nai B'rith nearly 20 years ago in 2004 in a submission to the ICJ at the time that, again, the General Assembly had solicited an advisory opinion at that time on the question of Israel's critical security barrier in the Palestinian claimed territories. The deadline for submissions to the ICJ, initial submissions, was July, and we're expecting comments on those submissions in October. And it's our understanding that the court plans to hear oral arguments at the beginning of next year. But we certainly hope that the court itself and all countries committed to an actual resolution of the conflict will encourage a different direction by the court itself.
And finally, several months ago, plans were announced for a UN meeting to develop responses to the problem of global anti-Semitism. What has the UN done and is doing on this issue? In what ways does the UN itself come up with strategies, if at all? And what do we want to see from any UN effort on anti-Semitism moving forward?
Well, as we've said, the UN has done a number of things that we would say have been very modest steps in the right direction on some of these issues that clearly as a Jewish community we care so deeply about. International Holocaust Remembrance Day is one initiative that B'nai B'rith has supported from the very beginning, going back well over 15 years now. UNESCO, although a setting with a fair number of challenges for our community over the decades, has begun to do more and more work on combating Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, including in educational and through educational settings. The Secretary General has promoted plans of action and strategies on hate speech and on protecting religious sites. And most recently, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, had appointed Miguel Moratinos, who heads the UN Alliance of Civilizations, as his focal point to combat anti-Semitism within the UN system. Now, in light of everything that I had said just a few minutes ago, clearly, not only outside the UN setting and the world at large, but within the UN itself, we face a good number of challenges. Officials with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights over the years, who on Twitter have said deplorable things, not only about the state of Israel, but about anyone supportive of the state of Israel. Special rapporteurs in Geneva affiliated with the Human Rights Council, saying terrible things, again, about Israel, about Israelis, about Zionism, and about supporters of Israel. And the list goes on and on and on. So for every step forward, unfortunately, we've had multiple steps backward. Now, this latest initiative to hold a meeting dedicated to anti-Semitism is something that we're supportive of, but we are keen to make sure that this and any initiative, if it is going to be serious and credible on combating anti-Semitism, will be genuinely comprehensive, genuinely concrete and practical in its approach to anti-Semitism in all of its forms. And by that, I mean that it can't only focus on, say, anti-Semitism in Europe or anti-Semitism on the far right. Needless to say, those are both incredibly important contexts, but only part of the story of contemporary anti-Semitism. And we would look to a consultation like this to really prioritize the views and the expertise of those most affected and most knowledgeable about anti-Semitism, namely the Jewish community and specialists on this very challenging issue, and to lift up, not in any way undercut or compete with existing progress, past and continuing progress on the issue of anti-Semitism. And I'll just mention a few examples. The working definition of IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, working definition of anti-Semitism, is one that really over years now has become the gold standard, not only within the Jewish community and among specialists on anti-Semitism, but among dozens of member states. And we would want to see any serious effort on anti-Semitism look to the IRA working definition as a guide to combating the scourge of anti-Semitism. Another, within the UN context, we were very pleased over recent years that the last special rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief, by the name of Ahmed Shahid, a former foreign minister of the Maldives, that he issued 2 reports dedicated exclusively to anti-Semitism and in a serious and thoughtful way. And so we would want, rather than reinventing the wheel or not making use of all that those resources have to contribute, we would want to make sure that those documents are taken into account in this new initiative as well.
David, thank you for your time and for all the work you do on behalf of B'nai B'rith.
Thank you.
Adriana, you're not only our special advisor on Latin American affairs, but also the deputy director of our affiliate, the American Jewish International Relations Institute, or Jewry. What can you tell us about the important work that Jewry does?
Well, Dan, Jewry focuses on dismantling what we call the anti-Israel propaganda apparatus that exists at the United Nations. But BDI has, of course, an office dedicated to UN affairs, and we work closely with them. But while our UN office covers everything that happens at the UN, Jewry only focuses on 3 entities that work out of the UN Secretariat building in New York City. These entities work all year long to advance the idea that Israel is an apartheid, racist state, and perhaps even more importantly, to promote the notion that the so-called Palestinian refugees, who according to the UN number more than 5 million today, should be granted a right to move to Israel and acquire Israeli citizenship. So even though they assert that they are in favor of a 2-state solution, they are not advocating for these people to settle in a future Palestinian state, but to settle in Israel then. So you can see that what these entities are really promoting is the destruction of Israel through demographic means, through the mass migration of these people to Israel. This is the so-called right of return, which is really a formula for the destruction of Israel and a formidable obstacle to the achievement of a peaceful solution to the conflict. The 3 entities I am talking about are the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, the Division for Palestinian Rights, and the Special Committee to Investigate Israeli Human Rights Practices, which, by the way, this last committee was modeled after a very similar committee that existed against apartheid South Africa, because you see, the Palestinians have always tried to equate Israel with apartheid South Africa so that Israel receives the same treatment at the UN. These entities are a real anomaly then within the UN system because they work to threaten the existence of a UN member state. No country other than Israel receives this kind of treatment by the UN. And what is also important to note is that they have staff paid with UN funds, which is really a waste of valuable UN resources. I'd like to mention that Jewry was founded by Ambassador Shifter, who unfortunately passed away in 2020. after working with us very closely for over a decade, and we are keeping his legacy alive by continuing with this important work.
Well, tell us more then about the way a Jewry works to confront this powerful anti-Israel propaganda apparatus at the UN.
Sure, then. You see, every year, all the UN member states vote at the UN General Assembly, which is the UN's legislative body, to renew the mandate and the funding authorization for these entities. What Ambassador Shifter had realized, and which this is something that we were able to confirm over the years, is that there is such a strong anti-Israel culture at the UN that many ambassadors, when they are not giving precise instructions on how to vote by their governments, they automatically vote against Israel without giving much thought to the content of the resolutions sometimes. There are cases where the governments have actually very good bilateral relations with Israel and still vote in this way. So what we do is that every year we identify these cases and make an effort to reach out to these governments and to make sure that they know what these resolutions are really about. And what we tell them is this: when you vote for the continued funding of these entities, you are voting for the destruction of Israel. Because as long as the Palestinians continue to believe that they will be able to destroy Israel with the help of the UN, they will have no incentives to negotiate peace. Then over the years, we have made substantive progress, and we believe that this is a fight worth fighting because the UN has become the last stronghold of support for the most extreme Palestinian positions, and we believe that this is something that needs to be confronted. So we have meetings with foreign governments. We partner with other peace-loving organizations, both Jewish and non-Jewish, and we also work extensively with the U.S. Congress.
Well, you also work a great deal in Latin America on a number of other issues, working together with our Director for Latin American Affairs, Eduardo Kohn. What would you say are the main issues on your agenda today, in addition to the Jewry agenda?
Yes, then I work on several issues, but in the interest of time, I'd like to mention, first of all, the AMIA case, because it is something I care deeply about. For those who are not familiar with the case, it relates to the 1994 Iranian-sponsored terrorist attack against the AMIA Jewish Center in Buenos Aires, which killed 85 people and injured many more. As you know, for a number of years now, we have been working with B'nai B'rith Argentina, with relatives of the victims, and with local and international legal experts to promote the adoption of the trial in absentia procedure, which would make it possible for Argentina to put the accused on trial, even if they continue to refuse to appear before the Argentine courts because the Iranian regime is protecting them. Next year, then, will be commemorated the 30th anniversary of the bombing, a very important anniversary. And we hope that the Argentine Congress will make some progress in this regard, and we will certainly keep working on this. And then I'd also like to mention an interview series that Eduardo Kohn, our Latin American director, and I started last year called Lens on Latin America, con el lente en Latinoamérica, which focuses mainly on Jewish life in the region and on the relations between the different Latin American countries and Israel. I strongly recommend people to watch it since they are fun, they are interesting, and they also give, I think, a good overview of the work that we as an organization have been doing in Latin America for decades.
And the title of that series is?
Lens on Latin America, or Con el lente en Latinoamérica in Spanish.
Well, I also hope everybody will look for it and watch it, and it is indeed a very important series. Adriana, thank you for all that you have done and over the years in working in Latin America on behalf of B'nai B'rith and the larger Jewish community.
You're welcome, Dan. A pleasure.
My colleague, Alan Schneider, director of the B'nai B'rith World Center in Jerusalem, joins me now. Alan, welcome.
Hi, Dan.
So what unique project has the World Center initiated in 2023? There are always new projects involving so many different areas of life in Israel and in terms of Israel diaspora relations. So what have you initiated in 2023?
Well, I'd like to touch very briefly on two projects, Dan. One of them is the Hebrew Diplomatic Corps. This is the first time that diplomats have been brought together in Israel, foreign diplomats who speak Hebrew. And we have done this now in partnership with the protocol department at the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we've identified together about 20 to 30 foreign diplomats who speak Hebrew at one level or another. And we thought that it would be a good idea to bring them together, give them the opportunity of using the language among themselves and learning about Israel, aspects of Israel that they might not otherwise be exposed to if they, in the normal course of diplomatic activity here. So we held the inaugural meeting at the ministry with Dr. Avshalom Kor, who is an internationally known expert on the Hebrew language. Made a very interesting presentation. And the second meeting was held at the Academy of the Hebrew Language that B'nai B'rith actually had a hand in establishing many years ago. And we met there with the president, the current president of the Academy, who made, again, a very interesting presentation about the Hebrew language and its connection to Arabic and other languages in the Middle East. And then we did a tour of the Academy. And I think this added a whole new dimension for these diplomats. And we intend to continue with this program after the summer and perhaps even open it up to members of their families who speak Hebrew, children here who go to school and have learned Hebrew, or spouses of the diplomats. So that was, I think, something very unique that we were able to accomplish this year. And then we have the Gratitude Award that you participated in also, Dan, where we presented for the first time awards to Polish citizens, non-Jewish, in Poland, who have dedicated their lives to maintaining Jewish culture and heritage in Poland, in many cases at a price, actually, for themselves. And in Warsaw, we had a ceremony in the context of the conference that was held by B'nai B'rith in Poland, marking 100 years of B'nai B'rith in free Poland. And we had, I think, a very moving event where two individuals received our presentation, our citation called the Gratitude Award. One of them runs a small organization that she founded in a former shtetl, a town where Jews used to live, and there are no Jews there. And later, late in life, actually, she realized and learned that there were Jews living among the population there, and she's been dedicated to preserving the Jewish cemetery and the site where the synagogue used to stand was destroyed, and other aspects of the Jewish life in shtetl Molina, which is where she's from. And the other individual was the director of a large organization that's now marking 25 years of activity, which is called the Forum for Dialogue, that brings Jews and non-Jews together in Poland for dialogue and better understanding. So we're already taking the first steps towards next year's presentations.
Well, you've worked for years to promote strong Israel diaspora relations, and also you've worked to foster more understanding in terms of the sacrifices that were made by Jewish rescuers of Jews during the Holocaust. Tell us a bit about those two areas that the World Center has been so deeply involved in.
One of the things we have done now for over 30 years is presenting our award for journalism for excellence in diaspora reportage. And we have done that in order to encourage Israeli journalists to report more on the Jewish diaspora. I don't have to tell you that the communities have been drifting apart for various reasons. And through this award, we wanted to encourage the Israeli media to invest more in reporting about the Jewish diaspora so that Israelis would be exposed to what is happening in diaspora communities all over the world. And we just recently had our last event where we recognized journalists from the Times of Israel, from Ynet, and we also presented a honorable mention and lifetime achievement award to very senior journalists who've been working in the field for decades, bringing the stories from the Jewish diaspora to Israeli audiences. So we felt that this is important. We also recognize that that ceremony, the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra, which, as you know, is a great representative for Israel around the world when it appears on the world stages and on the most famous world concert stages. And the Director General of the orchestra was with us at the ceremony and was very appreciative of the recognition of this major Israeli institution. On the other issue, Dan, that you mentioned, which is the matter of Jewish rescuers during the Holocaust, again, with the support from B'nai B'rith, that many years ago passed a resolution that we proposed to the Board of Governors, in directing us to engage in this area of activity of recognizing the heroism of Jewish rescuers during the Holocaust. Since that time, we have been deeply involved in the issue. We are members of a committee that deals with the issue on a daily basis, and also that presents, together with the World Center, the Jewish Rescuers Citation. This is the only citation, the only award that is until now has been given to Jewish rescuers. These are people who chose not to take up arms to fight, whether in the ghettos or as members of the partisans or otherwise against the Nazis, but rather to use their skills and the opportunities that they had in order to rescue fellow Jews. And they used, many different methods to do that, hiding Jews or escorting them over the mountains into neutral countries. In some cases, they were just individuals working on their own initiative. In other cases, they had large-scale organizations, underground organizations that were active. And so we have, until now, we have recognized, since 2011, 624 rescuers from all across Europe and also North Africa, Jews who endangered their own lives to rescue fellow Jews. And we are continuing with those activities. We have a major event with usually with over 1,000 people present at the B'nai B'rith Martyrs Forest on Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day here in Israel. And that ceremony is dedicated every year to the heroism of Jewish rescuers. We believe it's the only ceremony in the world, actually, that has that as its theme every year. And at that ceremony, we make the bulk of the presentations of the Jewish Rescuer Citation.
Alan, thanks for all the important work you do every day in Israel. Great to have you here today.
Thank you, Dan.
Joining us now is Mark Olshan, Associate Executive Vice President of B'nai B'rith and Director of the B'nai B'rith Center for Senior Services. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So our senior housing program really goes back more than 50 years. How has the original focus of that program evolved over the years up until the present day?
Well, Dan, the original goal of the senior housing program was to provide the B'nai B'rith membership in local communities around the country the means to provide affordable, safe, and secure quality apartments for income-qualified individuals without regard to their race, religion, or ethnic backgrounds. In partnership with the federal government, who provided the financial means for actually developing and building the local properties, the B'nai B'rith membership provided what we call the sweat equity that ensured that the housing would reflect the values and ideals of that specific community. They basically pulled it together, served on the board of directors, and oversaw the activities within that property. Relatively soon after, the first property was opened in 1971. we became the largest national Jewish sponsor of HUD subsidized housing in the country, with a combined network of properties offering over 5,000 apartments to qualified individuals. As the government funding for the program has decreased over the years, we've become increasingly focused on preserving and improving our network of properties such that they can remain viable and accessible to the new wave of qualified individuals that will continue to need them. We continue to recapitalize and refinance our programs to meet our future network needs well into the next 40 years. In essence, we've moved from mostly building new buildings to preserving what we currently have. So preservation has now become the new buzzword.
Well, quality of life for residents in a program like this really is at the basis of why we want to provide that housing. So how do the residents and their families benefit from the program?
Well, the goal is not simply to provide an apartment building, but really to create a sense of community and welcoming within that building. Our charge is to ensure that residents can live independently for as long as possible, such as to not require a premature move to a more institutional setting. We've become more focused over the years on making certain residents are linked to community resources and programs that promote independence and healthy aging. Aging in place, as we call it, has really become our mantra. To that end, the national staff provide a variety of training programs throughout the year for members of the local community boards of directors, the staff and management professionals, and even a resident leadership training retreat for residents of the buildings that come together to learn how to become more productive in their individual properties. The whole idea there is to keep people, again, as active, involved, and as healthy as we can. That's our focus inside the buildings.
How do we work with Congress to improve the quality of life for our residents? I know that a number of members of Congress who are representing districts where there are neighborhood housing properties have actually visited and seen with their own eyes exactly how the housing program works. So how is it that we weave a relationship with Congress into this program?
That's a difficult issue only because oftentimes when we go up to visit with some of these offices, they're not necessarily overly supportive of the money that needs to be spent in order to maintain and develop these properties. Nobody doubts the need, but right now, financial priorities are everything. And I don't have to tell you and those that are going to be watching this later on what the needs have been over the years. When I started, we had a federal housing policy. We don't have that anymore. So now we have to advocate to the individual offices to get their support to help develop programs to keep these programs alive and to keep monies available just to maintain the people currently living in the properties. So our staff meets regularly with the Hill staff. We invite members of Congress and their staffs to the buildings and have regular tours and meetings with the residents to let the residents interact directly with members of Congress to articulate their needs and their interests and be able to develop a dialogue between the congressional representatives and the individuals who represent their districts. So that is something we've been focusing on very strongly in the last number of years. Now, there is one more benefit, and it's something that people really forget about when they're talking about these programs. If you're talking about 5,000 units, and you're talking about over 5,500 residents living in buildings around the country, remember, most of these residents have family members and friends beyond the people that they know and meet in the buildings. So for every individual that live in our building, we're not only helping that individual, but that assistance translates to their friends, their families, and everybody that really comes in contact. So if you multiply the benefits, over time, and it really means that we are impacting a significantly larger number of people than just those that actually live in the property. And I think that's something that doesn't get articulated that often, but I think it's very important to recognize that these programs go well beyond just the individuals who live in the properties.
Well, Mark, I can't think of anything more important really than looking after the well-being, the welfare of seniors. Our program really meets many of those needs in terms of the housing program. We appreciate all you do. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
My colleague Andrea Cure is our Vice President of Development and Strategic Initiatives. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
Well, wherever there's a need, there is B'nai B'rith. That isn't just a tagline to you or to me or to all of us at B'nai B'rith. Tell us about what that means to you and how that fits in with B'nai B'rith's 180-year mission.
Sure. So, as you well know, B'nai B'rith's founders started this organization to help those in need. Their first act was to provide a stipend for a needy widow and her children. And as this organization grew, so did this people helping people approach. Our first disaster relief efforts date back to the mid-1800s. As an example, we responded to a plea by Sir Moses Montefiore in 1865 to help victims of a cholera epidemic in what was then Palestine. B'nai B'rith later distributed funds to those affected by the Great Chicago Fire in 1871, the Galveston, Texas flood of 1900, the San Francisco earthquake, 1906. But, there's other disasters and occurrences that we were present at. The Irish potato famine, Kishinev pogrom, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. B'nai B'rith was there to help during these now historic events, and we continue to help wherever there's a need. So more current day events, the Oklahoma City bombing, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, we were there. When people and communities are in need, we activate to help those impacted recover and rebuild.
You spent some time in Poland in March of 2022, just to bring this current, after Russia invaded Ukraine. You were part of the B'nai B'rith Boots on the Ground team, finding ways to help Ukrainian refugees who had fled the fighting into Poland. Tell us what that experience was like, and tell us about some specific aid that you and our team were able to provide in Poland to Ukrainians.
Certainly. Well, I will start off by saying that the experience was beyond meaningful. When we arrived, and the first place we went was the train station in Warsaw. It was filled with refugees, and it was also teeming with volunteers ready to help. This was very moving to see how the people of Poland and really people from all around the globe came to help these refugees escape the fighting. This was even more apparent when we traveled to the Medyka border crossing, where we spent time working in a mother and child tent. The site at the border was remarkable. NGOs from all around the globe set up tent after tent to offer aid and assistance to refugees fleeing the war and individuals. People who wanted to help other people from all around the world came to help as well. A global community was created, and I am just honestly honored to have been a part of it. We spent days volunteering at this site and at others doing whatever was really needed. We delivered goods to community centers. We provided essentials such as diapers and formulas for babies, hot chocolate for their older siblings, and tea and coffee for their mothers. And at the refugee center in Przemysl, we even cleaned the restrooms. Why? Because there was a need, and B'nai B'rith was there.
It's so interesting, really. Something like this, it really comes down to people and almost individual to individual. And this summer, you were in Poland again, helping distribute donations from our Ukrainian Relief Fund for scholarships for Ukrainian students at the Morasha School in Poland. This is a good example of B'nai B'rith's long game in disaster relief. Though we help immediately, as noted in the case of your first visit to Poland in 2022, we're not primarily first responders, but we view our role as helping a community to get back on its feet. So with that in mind, talk about these scholarships and how that helps in this disaster relief process.
Certainly. So yes, as you noted, our aid is usually focused on recovery and rebuilding. So it is that long game approach. And the scholarships we awarded to the students at the Marysia School in Warsaw, it really allowed their families to worry about one less thing as they worked to rebuild their lives in their newly adopted homeland. And while we were on site, we were lucky enough to be able to meet with 3 mothers who shared their stories with us and all that they had to leave behind and all that they had to go through since. They also shared how this school had become a second home for their children. And it was just an honor to be able to help these children rebuild their lives and continue their education. As a development professional, these on-the-ground experiences delivering aid from the smallest item, a lip balm or some hand lotion, to a school scholarship truly embody how philanthropy makes a difference. The work B'nai B'rith has done in Poland in delivering a variety of aid to refugees reminds me how important and meaningful this work is. Every dollar truly counts, and everyone who contributes to B'nai B'rith should be proud as well, as their support makes a difference in making sure that B'nai B'rith is ready to act when needs arise, wherever and whenever.
So really over the years, whether it's the Johnstown floods of the 1860s or any of the other disasters that you mentioned earlier, the mission remains the same over all of these years. Andrea, thanks again for all you do, and thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
My colleague Cheryl Kempler is our archivist and is perhaps best positioned to delve into B'nai B'rith's history. Cheryl, great to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Well, tell us what circumstances led to the formation of B'nai B'rith in 1843.
Well, the tip of the iceberg has been reached right now. A lot has been written about the genesis of B'nai B'rith, but I think that in the future, we're going to know more and more about it. What I like to do is personalize this time in American history and in Jewish history to kind of see why did men get together to form this kind of brotherhood. And, you think about the 1840s and all over the world, this was the time when people were becoming modern in their thought. They were leaving the religious faith-based life behind, and they were thinking about themselves as individuals. And this was certainly true of the German Jewish men who immigrated to America. They were free from kind of the strictures of their small towns or big cities where people were making sure that they adhered to the rules. When they got here, this was a big anonymous city. They certainly still identified as Germans and as Jews, but they found, well, maybe they didn't have to go to synagogue on Friday night. Maybe they could eat that food. Maybe they could wear something that was prohibitive, but they still wanted to maintain their Jewishness. And they also were thinking about all the visionary philosophies of the time, this brotherhood of man, and they wanted a part of that too, but as Jews. So a group of 12 men, not rich men, but school teachers, small merchants, barbers, they all got together. They were all congregants in Anshe Chesed, and they said to themselves, how will we make life better? How will we improve humanity as Jews? And they decided to form this little brotherhood band, like the Masons, like the Oddfellows, like many other groups at the time. I mean, you can think of the American Transcendentalists. They wanted the same thing. And so they formed what was like a safe space. So the men could go to each other and say, what do I wear for this job interview? How can I learn English? What will make me a successful American? At the same time as this individual need, they were thinking about their families. What would happen if they died? What about the community? So this accomplished everything. And it must have worked very well because not only were lodges being formed throughout New York, but as importantly, on the western borders of the United States. First Ohio, then all the way out to Denver and California, because this group was what Jews needed, something to improve humanity while finding out ways to still be Jewish. The synagogue was for talking and prayer and for discussion, but B'nai B'rith was for action. It was for getting things done.
During the next century, which takes us into the 20th century, B'nai B'rith and its lodges grew and its mission was expanded. Did its membership change as well in this and in other countries?
Well, of necessity, it had to, because the lodges were working, men were becoming more successful. So those who joined the lodges were joining for other things. They were joining for big projects, building orphanages, hospitals, homes for the aged, and these men had to be more affluent. And they became affluent partially through the B'nai B'rith. So yes, we changed. We were no longer a middle class organization, but we still maintained our German Jewish roots. I mean, if you look at some of the literature, the lodge meetings, the activities, everyone always had this nostalgic feeling for German culture. And in Europe and in Asia, lodges were being formed from the 1880s on, and they had a little bit more stringent requirements. These men, they could be merchants, they could be salespeople, they could be businessmen. But what I find often is that they had to demonstrate an erudition. So, for example, in Germany, the president of the Berlin Lodge was Maximilian Stein, and he was a brewer. He supplied all the beer to the German army during World War I. But he wasn't just that. He was a philosopher, and he wrote many books parsing the B'nai B'rith philosophy, and they were adhered to. This is what people were reading in Germany. So it was, every member had to be able to lecture to the group, whether it was on the music of Schubert, or Goethe, or Jewish theology, or the Bible, or Emma Lazarus. They all had to do this, unlike the United States. And I think that's what makes for the amazing B'nai B'rith culture of the European lodges, and also in Asia, where everything was entirely different. In the Asian districts, you had to be able to speak all sorts of languages, and you had to also maintain relationships, good relationships with people in charge, the Pasha, the Sultan, and you had to be able to do these things in a very rudimentary society as well. So this would make a fascinating study. I think that it's part of world history. You see what B'nai B'rith during World War I saved thousands of lives just by feeding people and more. Opening up medical clinics, helping refugees to repatriate, helping people during earthquakes, fires. It's just amazing how much they did with so little. Of course, they were supported by the American lodges and by the German lodges, but with that money, they were able to do miraculous things.
So towards the end of the 19th century, we became an international organization. Then in the 20th century, really an international organization, as we began to have members of lodges in Latin America and in the Middle East and in other places. Were there times in which lodge brothers or leaders from the U.S. and those in other countries ever got together, perhaps through conventions that were especially earmarked for this purpose?
Well, in the case of the Supreme Grand Lodge president, meaning our president here, they regularly made visits to both Europe and Asia. And in fact, sometimes our president, like Jules Bien, he earmarked a lot of projects for Asian lodges. But what was, I think, more interesting is that from the 19-teens on, there were these great spas in Poland, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Bad Nauheim, and Marienbad, Karlsbad. And this is where affluent Jewish people and also non-Jewish people spent their summers. And I read in an article in our magazine that the merchants put out big signs in their windows, "Welcome B'nai B'rith." And this is where men from all over Europe and the United States got together at these summer resorts. And they would have special meetings every week that brought everyone together. And it was said that the quality of these meetings were unusually high because everyone from every place could bring their experience, their understanding of Judaism, their understanding of culture at the time together and discuss it. I think this would also make a great book in itself to find these kinds of records. And there's some articles in our magazine. A dentist from Kansas City, he writes about going to Marienbad and mingling with the European Lodge brothers and finding how amazingly well educated they were, and also says that some of the lodge ritual was different, and he found that quite interesting as well. We had amazing lodge rituals with the iconography being parsed. We'd have to start way back and analyze that too.
Much of B'nai B'rith in Europe was destroyed along with the rest of a large portion of European Jewry during the Holocaust. The post-Holocaust rebirth and expansion of B'nai B'rith in Europe, in hindsight, seems like a near miracle. How was it realized?
Well, as much as I can identify with the German men who came in the 1840s and wanted some freedom, it's much harder for me to understand what happened. But there's a lovely artifact in our collections. It's a tiny notebook from France. And just hours after the armistice, it shows leaders and members of B'nai B'rith France going door to door to addresses to where former members lived. They were already, people who had just even sat down from the armistice and were trying to collect their thoughts. They were running around trying to reconstitute B'nai B'rith. And if you were there in Europe and maybe you had been in a camp or maybe you had survived, maybe you were thinking, why should I do this again? Why should I march towards humanity, as Dr. Beck would say, towards humanity through Judaism? Why should I do this again? Well, I think the big impetus was that many of our members, one, had not survived, or two, were in displaced persons camp, and they needed help. They were subsisting, they didn't have any clothes, they didn't have enough food. And so this, I think, was the catalyst that rallied members in Europe and caused them to liaison with refugee men who were here in the United States and in England and get together, try to help these people. And they organized what was called Adopt a Family. And this was a program where people all over the country, the lodges all over the country and in England, were sending food packages and clothes and shoes to people, to B'nai B'rith members in the DP camps. And who headed it? But the man who stayed in Germany, the theologian who stayed in Germany while other rabbis came to America and had been released from Theresienstadt just hours before the armistice, and that was Dr. Beck. And Dr. Beck was 72 years old. He was frail. You think, well, why doesn't he just relax? But no, what he did was he headed this program and he headed the renaissance of the lodges in Europe. And it was surprising how rapid that occurred. And even in countries where we had no lodges before, within months, 6 months of the armistice, a new lodge in Sweden, the Peace Lodge, and then all over Belgium, all over the place, that we had not any lodges before. And I think this was the idea that, yes, as long as people need us, no matter what happened to us, no matter how disillusioned we are, and I'm sure many of them were, there was no more idea about brotherhood. They still needed to help people. And with Dr. Beck at the helm, I think this was an amazing inspiration for people all over the world who were B'nai B'rith to reconstitute and rally.
Well, Cheryl, we know so much more about our 180 years because of the important work that you do in looking through and researching our archives and other sources of information about our organization. Thanks for what you do, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
I want to recognize each of our guests: Eric Fusfield, Alina Bricman, Eduardo Kohn, David Michaels, Adriana Camisar, Alan Schneider, Mark Olshan, Andrea and Cheryl Kempler, for sharing their work and demonstrating how much B'nai B'rith does, not only as the global voice of the Jewish community, but as an organization committed to making the world a better place. Thank you all for everything you do. And thank you for tuning into our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith. We hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you did, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Share this episode with friends and others, and learn more about what we do at bnaibrith.org. For all of our latest content, and if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook. This is your host, Dan Mariashin. Until next time, take care, everyone.